Walk out to your beds this evening and look at them the way a stranger would. Not the way you looked at them in June, when everything was fresh and the whole season was still stretched out ahead of you. Look at what is standing out there in the middle of August. Leggy stems holding up 3 tired flowers. Petals gone papery and pale. Bare dirt showing through where something quit on you in July and you never filled the hole. Now do a little arithmetic with me, because nobody does this part out loud. Your soil at this moment is sitting somewhere around 70 to 80 degrees. That is the warmest it will be all year. Seeds dropped into ground that warm do not sulk and sit there for 3 weeks the way spring seeds do. They crack open in 5 to 7 days. Meanwhile, your first frost, depending on where you garden, is somewhere between 8 and 14 weeks away. 8 to 14 weeks of growing season still sitting in the bank. Flowers that run from seed to first bloom in 4 to 8 weeks. That gap is real, it is open, and it narrows every day you spend deciding. I'm George, and this channel exists for the parts of the growing calendar that quietly get skipped. Late summer sowing is the biggest one. The reason you have never heard much about it has nothing to do with your skill. It has to do with retail. Garden centers make their money between March and June. By the second week of August, their floor space is already being handed over to pumpkins, corn stalks, and pallets of mums that will be dead by November. The seed rack gets shoved into a corner behind the clearance hoses. Nobody in that store is going to tell you that a $3 packet could have that bed flowering harder in October than it did in July. So that is what this video is for. 14 flowers you can direct sow into open soil this week. I'm counting them down from 14 to number 1 because the ones at the bottom are the ones I would fight hardest to keep in my own beds. One heads up before we get moving. The flower at number 9 is the one that catches people off guard every single year. It is the plant that takes the ugliest, most neglected strip of your property, the one along the fence you have been apologizing for since May, and turns it into the thing the neighbors slow down for. I'm not naming it yet, and skipping ahead will not help because the reason it works comes down to a detail most people get wrong. While it is on your mind, do me one small favor. Drop your USDA zone, or just your state, down in the comments. Some of you are looking at a first light freeze in the opening days of October. Others will be cutting flowers on Thanksgiving morning. That difference changes how bold you can be with everything I'm about to cover, and I would rather build my next videos around where you actually garden than pretend every backyard behaves the same way. If a second season out of ground you already own sounds worth having, hit subscribe while you are here. It is free, and it keeps the rest of this series reaching you. Flower number 14, Scarlet Flax. We are opening with a plant barely anybody grows anymore, which is a shame because it may be the prettiest thing you can throw into bare dirt in August. Scarlet Flax. Linum grandiflorum rubrum on the seed packet. The blooms are about the size of a nickel, satiny crimson with a darker eye, held on stems so thin they look like green wire. Plant a patch and the whole colony shivers in the slightest breeze. Here is why it belongs at the front of this list. Scarlet flax hates real heat. Sown in April, it burns out the moment July arrives, which is why people try it once and write it off. Sow it in warm August soil, and it comes up in 7 to 10 days, then spends its entire flowering life in the cooling, gentler conditions it was built for. Sow shallow, barely a 1/16 of an inch of soil over the seed, thin seedlings to 6 inches. Blooms arrive in roughly 7 weeks. Each flower lasts a single day, but the plant replaces them every morning, and it will self-sow if you let the last flush ripen. Flower number 13, Sweet Alyssum. If your frost date is close and you are worried you have already missed the window, this is your insurance policy. Sweet Alyssum is the fastest flower in this entire lineup. Seed to sprout in 4 or 5 days. Sprout to first bloom in as little as 4 weeks. Even if you are watching this in the last days of August in a cold zone, alyssum still has room to run. It grows low and wide, spreading into a dense carpet of tiny four-petaled blooms in white, soft pink, or lavender. The scent is the part people never expect. Put it near a walkway or a chair, and you will smell honey before you see the flowers. Its real job is architectural. Every bed has a hard edge where soil meets lawn or path, and alyssum softens that line so the planting looks finished instead of chopped off. Surface sow it, because the seed needs light. Press it against the soil, keep it damp, and space plants 6 inches so they knit together. It shrugs off light frost and reseeds readily. Flower number 12, calendula. Next up is one of the very few flowers that actually improves as your season winds down. Calendula, sometimes sold as pot marigold, though it is not related to true marigolds. The common assumption is that cooling nights shut flowering plants down. Calendula runs the opposite direction. Cool nights and shorter days are the conditions it was bred in, and blooms get larger and more saturated as October moves in. The cold tolerance is the headline. Established calendula will take temperatures down around the mid-20s without losing its flowers. After the first real freeze, calendula is still standing there looking smug. Look for the variety Indian Prince. Deep mahogany orange petals with a nearly black center and a bronze reverse. Sow ½ inch deep, expect sprouts in 7 to 10 days, and first blooms around 6 to 7 weeks. It handles partial shade better than almost anything else here, so it is your answer for the bed that gets sun only until 2. Snip spent blooms and it keeps pushing new ones. Flower number 11, bachelor's button. Anyone who has grown cornflower in spring knows the arc. Gorgeous blue in June, floppy chaos by mid-July, gone by August. Most people conclude it is short-lived and never sow it again. That conclusion is where the opportunity hides. Bachelor's button did not die of old age. It melted in the heat. This is a cool weather annual hardy into the low 20s, and an August sowing hands it the conditions it has been asking for. The variety I keep coming back to is blackball. Instead of the familiar cornflower blue, you get dense velvety blooms in a maroon so dark it reads black in low light. Set that against orange calendula and it looks deliberate in a way that mixed seed packets never do. One detail matters here. Cornflower seed needs darkness to germinate, so cover it with a 1/4 inch of soil rather than surface sowing. Sprouts appear in 1 to 2 weeks. Blooms follow around 8 weeks. Pinch the growing tip at 6 inches for a bushy, many-stemmed plant instead of a lanky one. Flower number 10, annual baby's breath. The next one is not a star, and it never pretends to be. It is the plant that makes every other flower in the bed look better. Annual baby's breath, Gypsophila elegans, usually sold as Covent Garden. It throws up a loose cloud of tiny white stars on branching stems about 18 inches tall. On its own, it is pleasant and forgettable. Woven between bold colors, it does something remarkable. It separates the loud tones so they quit competing, and the planting suddenly reads as a composition rather than a pile of clashing colors. For our purposes, it also happens to be quick. Germination in 7 to 10 days, flowering in 6 to 8 weeks. The trade-off is lifespan. Each plant flowers hard for about 3 weeks and then declines. In August, you get one pass, so sow generously and thickly for a longer, fuller show. Bury the seed about 1/8 of an inch and thin to 8 inches. It prefers soil on the sweet side, so a light scattering of garden lime helps if your ground runs acidic. Getting your ground ready and knowing your deadline. Before we get to number 9, let's handle the 2 things that decide whether any of this works, because they apply to every flower on the list, and I would rather cover them once properly than repeat them 14 times. First, your deadline. If you garden in zones 3 through 5, where a killing frost often arrives in the opening week of October, your seeds need to be in the ground within the next 7 to 10 days. Zones 6 and 7 have more slack, comfortably through the end of the month. Zones 8 through 10 can push direct sowing into early September and still collect a full bloom cycle before anything cold arrives. Second, your soil, which is where most late sowings quietly fail. August ground has been baked for 2 months. The top inch often forms a crust hard enough that water beads and rolls off it. So, before a single seed leaves the packet, work the top 4 to 6 inches loose with a hand fork and break the crust up completely. If you have compost, mix an inch of it through that loosened layer. Compost matters less for nutrition here than for holding moisture in the top few inches where seeds actually live. Then water the bed thoroughly the day before you sow, not the day of. Damp, settled soil gives far better seed contact than dry ground flooded afterward. Flower number 9. Branching sunflowers. Here it is, the one I flagged at the start. Sunflowers. And I already know the image in your head, which is precisely the problem. You are thinking of those single-stalk giants that shoot up 10 feet, open one enormous head, hold it for about 12 days, then bend over and spend the rest of autumn looking like a crime scene. I'm talking about dwarf branching sunflowers, and the difference between the two is night and day. A branching type grows 2 to 3 feet tall, and, instead of committing everything to one flower, it splits into 8 or 10 separate blooming stems. As one head fades, 3 more are opening behind it. You get weeks of color from one plant rather than one brief event. Look for solar flare, which mixes gold, rust red, and deep bronze petals across the same plant, so one packet gives you the variation of 3. So half an inch deep, 10 inches apart, full sun without compromise. Germination takes about a week, and flowering follows in 6 to 7. Because the plant branches, it holds up in wind and heavy rain far better than the giants ever managed. Birds and squirrels love sunflower seed, so lay a scrap of row cover over the row until the seedlings are up. Flower number 8. Zinnia. Zinnias have a reputation as a strictly summer flower. Plant in May, enjoy in July, done. Zinnias do not track the calendar. They track soil temperature and sunlight, and in August, you have more of both than you did at spring planting. Seed dropped into warm ground sprouts in 5 to 7 days. Variety choice is the whole game. Avoid the enormous dinner plate types, which need close to 90 days and will run straight into your frost date. Reach instead for the profusion series. These stay compact and mound outward rather than growing tall and bare-legged. They carry strong resistance to powdery mildew, and they flower in 8 to 9 weeks. The blooms are smaller, but the plant covers itself in them, in deep orange, cherry red, and warm apricot. Sow a 1/4 inch deep and space them a full 10 inches apart. Crowding zinnias is the single most common way people invite mildew into a late bed. Water at the base in the morning rather than over the leaves at night, and they keep producing until real frost ends it. A quick word before we continue. If you are still watching, I want to say something to you directly. Nobody pays me to name these varieties. No seed company, no nursery chain, no fertilizer brand. That matters more than it sounds, because most gardening advice you encounter is downstream of somebody's sales calendar. The glossy magazine is funded by the companies advertising in it. Generic advice, written for everyone in the country, ends up applying properly to nobody. What you get here comes out of real seasons, real failures, and beds I have to look at every morning. If that is the information you want weekly, subscribing costs nothing and make sure it reaches you. Flower number 7. French marigold. Marigolds get dismissed as the flower your grandmother grew, so almost nobody uses them for what they are actually good at. The color is the least interesting thing about this plant. French marigold roots release compounds into the surrounding soil that suppress root knot nematodes, and the foliage carries a pungent scent that makes it harder for pests to locate the plants around it. Every flower we have already discussed benefits simply from having marigolds planted nearby. You are getting pest management disguised as decoration. Then there is the design job. take the deep orange of the variety Bonanza and run it as a low border along the front of your bed, directly beneath the dark maroon of black ball cornflower. That repetition of warm tone at ground level pulls everything above it into a single composition. Sow a quarter-inch deep, expect germination in 5 to 7 days, and first flowers in about 6 weeks. Full sun, moderate water, and resist the urge to feed them. Rich soil gives huge leafy plants and few flowers. Flower number 6. Nasturtium. This next plant asks almost nothing of you except one small action, and skipping it is the difference between a decent result and a very good one. Nasturtium has strong apical dominance, which is a technical way of saying it wants to funnel all its energy into one growing tip and run in a single direction. You end up with one long rope of a vine with flowers scattered thinly along it. The fix takes 4 seconds. When seedlings reach 4 inches, pinch out the topmost growing tip with your fingernails. The plant immediately redirects that energy sideways, and within 2 weeks, you have 3 or 4 stems instead of 1. That is the entire maintenance program for the season. Grow the variety Alaska for cream marbled foliage that looks good even between flushes of bloom. Sow 1/2 inch deep, germination in 7 to 10 days, flowers in 5 to 6 weeks. The critical rule is to keep the soil lean. Fertilized nasturtium produces beautiful round leaves and almost no flowers. Leaves and flowers are edible, and it works as a trap crop, pulling aphids off plants you care about more. Flower number 5. Coreopsis tinctoria. Now for a flower you will not find on any garden center bench because it looks unimpressive in a plastic pot and never earns shelf space. Plains coreopsis. Thin, wiry stems carrying clusters of small daisy-shaped blooms, mahogany red at the center bleeding out to a clean gold rim, as though each petal were dipped in 2 colors on purpose. In a pot, it looks like a weed. Sown in a drift, it becomes one of the best things in the bed. What makes it valuable in this particular window is how it handles falling temperatures. Heat-dependent annuals lose momentum as September soil cools. Plains coreopsis takes that transition in stride and keeps flowering through the exact stretch when the rest of your garden is losing interest. Sow it on the surface with barely any covering because the seed needs light to germinate. Space 6 to 8 inches. Sprouts appear in about a week, flowers in roughly 7. Water until established, then leave it be. This is a prairie native that performs better with neglect than with attention, and if you allow a few late blooms to ripen, it will plant next year's patch for you. The problems you will actually run into late sowing brings a few specific challenges that spring planting never does, so let's get ahead of them. Heat stress on seedlings is the big one. Bare August soil surfaces can climb past 100 degrees in afternoon sun, which is brutal on a seedling rooted 1/2 inch deep. If you see wilting at 3 in the afternoon while the soil underneath is still moist, that is heat, not thirst. Scatter a thin layer of straw around the seedlings, not over them. It can pull surface temperature down several degrees without shading the leaves. Patchy germination almost always comes from inconsistent watering. A seed that dries out once during germination frequently never restarts. Until you see even sprouting, water lightly every day rather than deeply twice a week. Aphids gather on soft new growth. A teaspoon of plain dish soap in a quart of water, sprayed directly onto the insects, breaks down their outer layer on contact. Then if seedlings vanish overnight leaving bare stems, you have slugs. A shallow dish of beer sunk to soil level handles them cheaply. Flower number 4. Love in a mist. We are into the top 4, and this one is a personal favorite that hardly anybody directs sows anymore. Love in a mist. Nigella damascena, the variety Miss Jekyll. The flower is cornflower blue or soft white, surrounded by a collar of fine thread-like foliage so that each bloom appears to float inside a green haze. Nothing else in a seed catalog looks like it. You cannot buy it as a transplant because it despises root disturbance, which is precisely why it has disappeared from garden centers. It only works sown where it will grow, which makes it ideal here. It is also a committed cool weather plant. Sow in late August, and the plant does its growing as temperatures ease, which is when it performs. Cover the seed a quarter-inch deep, since it needs darkness. Germination runs a little slower at 10 to 14 days, with flowers around 8 weeks. After bloom, it forms inflated striped seed pods that dry perfectly for winter arrangements. Flower number 3. China Aster. China Aster carries a reputation for being fussy that it has not earned in my beds. Somewhere along the line, gardeners decided this plant required staking, precise feeding, and constant fussing. In practice, it tolerates uneven watering, ordinary soil, and long stretches of being ignored. It simply produces. Ask for the Matsumoto strain. Dense double blooms in lavender, deep rose, and clean white on stems sturdy enough that staking never comes up. As a cut flower, it holds in a vase for well over a week. The value of this plant in a fall bed is reliability rather than drama. It fills the gaps between the loud flowers, week after week, straight through cooling October weather. Sow a quarter-inch deep, 10 inches apart, germination in 1 to 2 weeks, blooms around 8 weeks out. One real rule: do not plant China Aster in the same spot 2 years running, because soil-borne aster wilt builds up. Flower number 2. Strawflower. This might be the hardest plant to kill of anything we have covered. Strawflower. Touch a bloom while the plant is alive and healthy, and the petals feel dry and papery, almost like crepe paper. That is not distress. Those are not petals at all. They are stiff modified bracts, and they are why the plant survives Australian conditions where drought and poor soil are the baseline. The variety Bright Bikini gives you a mix of gold, crimson, bronze, and soft pink on compact plants that do not sprawl or need support. Here is the bonus nobody mentions. Because those bracts are already dry, you can cut stems at their peak, bundle them, and hang them upside down in a dark, airy space. They hold color and shape for a year or more. That means the flowers you sow this month are still decorating your kitchen next spring. Sow on the surface, barely pressing the seed in because it needs light. Germination takes 1 to 2 weeks, and flowers follow in 7 to 8. Water only when the soil has gone completely dry. Flower number 1, Cosmos. And that leaves number 1, which earns the spot because of a piece of plant biology that reframes this entire video. Cosmos. Airy fern-like foliage, wide simple blooms drifting on tall stems. You have probably grown it. What most people never learn is why Cosmos routinely looks better in late September than it did in July. It is not simply that cooler weather is kinder. Cosmos is photoperiod sensitive. It measures the length of the night, and as nights lengthen through late summer, that lengthening actively triggers heavier flowering. The plant blooms harder because autumn is arriving, not in spite of it. Everything else on this list is racing your frost date. Cosmos is walking straight into its best conditions. Grow Rubenza. Blooms open a deep wine red and fade gradually to dusty antique rose as they age, so a single plant carries 2 colors at once. Sow a quarter-inch deep, germination in about a week, flowering in roughly 7. Keep the soil poor and unfertilized or you will grow 6 feet of foliage and very little else. Pinch the tip at 8 inches for a branching plant that flowers until frost finally takes it. Add up what you have spent the last few summers trying to hold color together. The flat of annuals in June replacing something that failed. The bag of potting mix. The second trip back in August when the first round gave out. For most people, that lands somewhere between $200 and $500 a year, most of it patching holes. 3 seed packets cost about $9 and fill the same space, for longer. Scarlet flax, satin crimson on wire stems. Sweet alyssum, 4 weeks to bloom and honey on the air. Calendula, getting better as the nights cool. Bachelor's button, rewarded by a second chance. Baby's breath, the connector that ties the whole bed together. Branching sunflowers, 10 heads per plant on your worst strip of ground. Zinnias, choosing profusion over the giants. French marigold, doing design and pest control at once. Nasturtium, transformed by a single pinch. Plains coreopsis, thriving on neglect. Love in a mist, the one you cannot buy in a pot. China aster, dependable week after week. Strawflower, still beautiful a year after cutting. And cosmos, wired by day length to peak exactly when everything else fades. Your best gardening days this year were never behind you. Nobody simply told you the window was open. Next week, I'm walking through bed layouts and container pairings using these 14 together. Subscribe so it reaches you. Share this with whoever has been mourning their July beds, and go loosen some soil while it is still warm.